We are going to be talking about something that if I wish I lived in the 4th century, because the big controversy surrounding the 4th century to be things like, what does it mean when we say Jesus is God? We could have big long discussions about that. It would be awesome. Unfortunately, we do not live in the 4th century. We live in the 21st century. And the biggest thing that people obsess over is sexuality. And so, as a disclaimer for tonight, my two things. One, I will only use language that is explicit as St. Paul uses. So, for instance, when we think of St. Paul's letters, those letters were read out loud to Christians from 2 to 80, right? And he uses terms in there that are technical terms for what was going on in the Roman Empire at the time. What's fascinating is I wish we lived in a time where it was less like the Roman Empire he was in. But in fact, we're actually in a time where it's much more like that, in lots of fascinating and horrifying ways, which we'll talk about a little bit. But as I say, in discussing this tonight, our goal is not to be graphic or explicit. Our goal is to be comprehensive as we can be. So, with that in mind, a big thing a person will hear in ad nauseum in college, this is just coming, but one hears all over the culture and one hears all over the internet, is this. The Christian view of sexuality is evil, hateful, bigoted, and makes people kill themselves. This is the way it's often put. So if you have a traditional Christian ethic regarding sexuality, you are an evil, terrible person by association, right? This is continually gains steam in our culture. This becomes an extant idea, it becomes a big idea in the sexual revolution of the 1960s, and it just continued to keep up steam at a faster and faster and faster pace. So to give you one example of a quote on this that one can find, Dan Savage, who's a writer, says, "The dehumanizing bigotry set forth from the lips of faithful Christians gives your straight children a license to verbally abuse, humiliate, and condemn the gay children they encounter at school. They fill your gay children with suicidal despair." And so, a lot of people hear that and go, well, I don't want people to be filled with despair. So there must be something wrong with traditional Christian ethics, is the immediate place one runs to, right? I mean, with all respect to Mr. Savage, this is a common technique of people who don't really want to argue the merits of an idea. What you do is you find people who society doesn't like, who believe an idea, and then you put them front and center as the spokesman for an idea, and then people go, oh, I don't like that person, so I don't want to believe in that idea. And there are plenty of idiots who are right about stuff, right? Just like there are plenty of evil people who write about some things. That's just a fact of the economy of ideas in our world, right? A reason we have to kind of talk about this, though, is that we're sort of living in the fruit of all of this change in sexual ethics over the last 40 years. One of the big things, particularly for young women sort of faced with the onslaught, as you are here, that you're going to come across in the rest of your life, is that the massive use, for instance, of something that would have been unthinkable even 50 years ago, and so a lot of this has to come through the internet, is the massive use of something like pornography among young men. So there are terrifying studies on this done by secularists that find that sort of your average male is addicted to pornography at 11 years old, right? And so then they learn about sexuality, not from something like the Bible or even from their parents. They learn about it from that, right? And so one has to be incredibly careful in that regard, because it is a dangerous, horrible space in which that is happening. Some school systems have started offering classes on this for young men that just use all this. It's horrifying, but it's kind of the world. So when you're approached in this way, when you go into this milieu, a space without a biblical sexual ethic, you're going to find that people are going to have all sorts of different ideas about this. So something to keep in mind as we continue as we think about this more. So that unfortunately the general Christian response, as I say, to being shown that, or at least having someone say to you that if you think this traditional way about Christian ethics, people will kill themselves, is just a fold. And to say, oh geez, then I guess we can't think that way, or at least we can't say our views out loud. Now, of course, this doesn't take into consideration that people who tend to, there's all sorts of sociological studies on this. People who tend to be transgendered, or people who tend to be on the homosexual spectrum, tend to have higher rates of suicide just in general, not dependent upon where they are. But that's neither here nor there. We still want to take this question seriously, because it's one you're going to constantly be confronted with in your college career and beyond. So, another reason people will sort of fold on Christian sexual ethics is because it connects them to the celebrities or cultural icons they like. And in an age in the age of the internet, we're actually much more connected to those people than we are to our actual neighbors, which is a weird thing. It's the first time this has ever happened, right? So people feel more connected to someone, an artist they see on YouTube, or they feel more connected to someone they talk to on Snapchat or in social media in other ways than they do with someone who lives next door to them, right? I mean, they've done polls on this and asked people, like, who are your next door neighbors, like, around your house? And people are like, I have no idea. But they can tell you all sorts of people who are on sort of their list of friends who are international or 1,000 miles away, right? So they want to feel connected to them, and they want to feel sort of part of a national network of ideas. And no worries. And so the big sort of nexuses of these ideas, of course, are the coasts, which sort of kind of connect people together in this idea. And in those ideas, it's a very un-Christian sexual ethic. So people will fold on that to be part of that, what they see as their actual living community, a community that's nowhere near them or nowhere around them. That's a new problem. It's a new interesting thing that we have to think about. We should talk about what is sort of the fruit, though, of all this. What has all this produced, other than some of the things we've already talked about? It's important to start out with that our concepts, or what's sort of sold to us as modern sexuality, are just old ideas that have sort of come back from the dead, right? It took Christianity a tremendous amount of time in the Western world to eliminate things like, in the Roman Empire, it was very common for a man of means to have, as he was getting older, sort of a companion who was also of a sexual nature, a male companion. And then, of course, you would get rid of that companion when you got married to a woman, and then the companion would stay on. Interesting, this companion would dress like a woman as you were sort of all together. There are poems, there's all sorts of things. This was a very common thing in the ancient world. We know nobody really talks about it anymore. But because it took Christianity a long time to say that is a illegitimate relationship, right? We'll talk about why Christianity did that later. Or, for instance, even something like transgenderism. So there was this fascinating cult, the cult of Cybele, which was sort of a goddess, right? And the priests of Cybele were men. But in order to be more like the goddess, they would castrate themselves and wear these bright robes. And they'd have these parades through the cities. This is the world Paul's walking into with the gospel. And they would recruit people to do this, right? And it was a way of finding an identity among a group of people who would care for you and take care of you, right? That's not that dissimilar to what we see within so much of what we would call sort of transgender culture. People will talk about their sexuality as their identity, right? And they can connect into a community of people who act and think like them. That's a powerful thing in a world that's consumed with loneliness, which is what we find more and more and more. So that's something we have to consider here. These are not sort of, new ideas. These are just old ideas that have come back from the dead. There's nothing progressive about them. They're just old. But what's interesting, that the problem here is that it took Christianity an awful long time, and it never really actually conquered this completely, was the idea of, within the sort of the Roman mind, and within so much of the idea, that sex was about dominance or power over another person. We find this a lot in Roman literature. This is something, again, that the apostles had to fight against tooth and nail, and why they talk about this a good bit within their epistles. Why this is something the church fathers were talking about a good bit. Because they were trying to break this idea that this is about dominating another person. What's happened is that's come right back into our vocabulary about sexual relations. So you'll hear people say it all the time, or you'll hear your professor say, or anyone else say, what do you need to do to have power in a relationship? Who has power in the relationship? Or subvert the patriarchy's power, right? This whole idea of the relationship between men and women primarily being about power and a power dynamic is not a Christian idea. This is a much older idea that this is it's never been fully gotten out of our culture, and now it's back full force. So you have people within relationships with each other who are constantly afraid to share, or constantly afraid to show weakness to the person they're with, because they don't want to lose the power of the relationship. When chivalry died, this took its place, right? Is a way to think about it. So the question we have to ask ourselves is, if it's all about power, who benefits from this arrangement, right? Unfortunately, the people who benefit from it are powerful men benefit from this relationship. So for instance, I included a sort of a list of folks, and Hugh Hefner, the founder of Playboy magazine, who died last year. When he died, he was given all sorts of wonderful write-ups in all the major newspapers in the United States of America. But the guy was a pornographer and assaulted women. But because he was on the forefront of this idea of breaking down Christian sexual ethics, he was a hero. Right? That's fascinating to consider, that was more important than what he actually stood for. That he was somehow empowering women by paying them to be nude in his magazines. That's crazy, but you'll hear that all the time on college campuses. You're just going to hear that all the time. And that you can be empowered by doing the same thing, right? Who benefits from this? Lechers. Bad men benefit from this. It's unbelievable that people have convinced themselves into it, right? Harvey Weinstein, that was a big scandal that broke last year, where we learned that basically every actress we've pretty much seen in a movie was sexually assaulted. What? How could that possibly be? Right? That happened. No big deal. And life, people kind of went, ooh, that's horrible for a moment, and then just life kept churning, kept going on. Man, maybe we should rethink what's happened in this time period. Well, how could someone do this and have no repercussions? He's not in jail. He lost his job. So now he lives in his mansion. There are no repercussions for him, right, for doing that. And then I included on here Presidents Clinton and President Trump. I had to. Unfortunately, today the news broke that our current president paid $130,000 to pay off a porn star who's having an affair with when his wife was having his baby. Like at a certain point, that would have blown people's mind. Everyone's kind of like, I guess. Stuff happens. And the same thing happened when I was a kid, and President Clinton was having an affair while he was president. People, what ended up happening is the people who were on that side of the aisle said it's not a big deal. And the people on the other side of the aisle said, oh, it's a big deal. And now we reversed that because the devil has a sense of humor, I guess. And so now the other side of the aisle is saying, oh, this isn't that big a deal. And the other side saying, oh, it is a big deal. It's fascinating, especially if you forget that none of these people are serious and they're all about just grasping for power, right? So, the idea, if you told me even like 2 years ago that we would have a president who had done this, I would say, oh, that can't possibly happen, but I would have been naive and stupid. Once you've opened this door of giving powerful men this kind of way of this kind of power, it has no end. And of course, this can work its way out theoretically into powerful women as well, using their power over others. But it's primarily used in this way. The same way like a tribal chieftain would have done this, 2,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago, right? Still throughout the world, right? When we broke Christian ethics in America over the last 40 years, and what we've done, basically unleashed, is everything Christianity was trying to put back in the box for 2,000 years. Out, chomping around, messing people up, right? And people say it's a victory. It's not really a victory. I would argue it's not. Not for actual people. Not for the weak, who gets sort of smashed by all this. So what we find is in our modern, ancient world, right? Love isn't love. So there's that big slogan, right? Love is love. I hate that slogan because there's a tautology, which means it doesn't mean anything. I mean, if you say something is something, it doesn't tell you anything. It's not a definition, right? Love is a dog. Okay, at least I know what you're talking about. But love is love means nothing, right? Love isn't love. Love is about power. Who's got power? That's what it's really about. Which is a horrifying vision of love. So, again, people who benefit from this arrangement or think they benefit. There's a lot of people who think they benefit from this arrangement who don't. Right? There's a lot of people who convince themselves that they are benefiting from this who are not benefiting from it whatsoever. Those people control mass media, industry, and academia. Right? So they propagate these ideas all over the place. That Christian sexual ethics are backwards and are harmful, and that the way forward is just to embrace our animal natures as much as we can. So there are lots of examples of this all over the place. But what they do is, because they control industry, mass media, and academia, they then tell you, follow your heart. This is one of my big pet peeves. They tell you, follow your heart, right? Because what they're hoping is that they've indoctrinated you enough that the voice in your heart is their voice. That's what they're hoping for. And it's pretty good. So when people go, I'm just following my heart, they're not really just following their heart. They're following the thing they were told to think. They've been hearing it their whole lives, though, so it sounds like their own voice. It's horrifying, but it happens all the time. And because they're literally quoting other people. This is the thing that blows my mind. So people will get on the internet and they'll say something and say, this is just my opinion. No, it's not. It's something you heard from somebody else that you either put into your heart and forgot about, or you heard somewhere 2 seconds ago and now you're regurgitating. That's not. I mean, that's fine. You can. That's fine. That's not like you just came up with this thing all of a sudden, right? So, so the whole follow your heart thing is always a disaster. So, for instance, there are lots of reasons people get divorces. The one I hate, and God says He hates divorce, but obviously, but the worst one is when people will say, like, for instance, they have children. The children they've sworn to protect with everything they have, right? Well, my heart says I have to go get a divorce and have sexual relations with this other woman. So, to hell with you, right? Or they'll say my kids would want that. No, they don't. No kid ever wants this. They want their mom and dad to be together, right? And the idea that, well, because my heart wants this more than it wants to take care of you, obviously, this must be the right thing to do. So I'm going to go follow my heart. And you just destroyed all these things, right? And you can do all sorts of terrible things following your heart. Every bad thing that's ever been done is by someone following their heart, right? So abortion is a great example of this too. The great thing about hurting kids is that they don't fight back, so it's easy. So like divorce is like that. So the little kids, you can hurt them because they're not going to fight you back. Abortion's the same way. The baby's inside the womb. It doesn't get to vote. It doesn't have a voice. Easy to flush down the toilet and throw in the trash. Easy to do that. People do it, and so. But again, that's people saying, "I'm not ready for a child. I have to follow my heart, so I can do mass murder." It's fascinating. And there's lots and lots of examples all through this, where we've told people that the ultimate ethic is to follow your heart, and horrible things happen all the time out of it. So what we find at the end of all this is that there's nothing more dehumanizing, right? That was the original question, right? Mr. Savage said that Christian sexual ethics were dehumanizing. We would argue, and I think there's lots of evidence for this, that there's nothing more dehumanizing than a sexual ethic that takes a beautiful, mystical union of two people, that takes that and throws it away and turns it into nothing more than what one will see exhibited by farm animals, by wolf packs and chimpanzees. That's dehumanizing, right? Because you're literally saying, don't act like a human, right? You're literally saying the ultimate is to act like these animals, right? I mean, because that's how like a wolf pack works. I mean, a wolf pack works the same way Harvey Weinstein worked. I mean, they have the alpha male who's got all the power, and he gets the most, genetically, the most, pleasing of the female wolves, because he's strong, he's powerful, he exerts his influence, and he gets it. It's horrifying. Now people will say, let's have that system for us. What could go wrong? Well, lots of things can go wrong, as it turns out, and we're living through it. I mean, there's lots of other things we could talk about in terms of the aftermath of all of this, and how you're going to be living through it. And I wish you didn't have to. I wish I didn't have to, frankly. But what the good news about this is that things are going to get so bad, and it's not really good news. I hate to put it that way. But there's a certain sense in which people are going to look at this and go, oh my goodness, this isn't working. And this is the space in which Christianity should be able to go in and go, we have a better way to live than this, which is something Christianity did in the first century. People were angry at them for it. People wrote mean things about Christians who said these things we're going to say tonight, and people burned them and killed them, right? But over time, it won out. As it basically won in the culture of ideas. And these things are cyclical, as one sees through history. We don't get to choose the time to live in, we just have to do our best in where we are. So, let's talk about quickly a Christian response to all this. What do we do? One could sit down in despair, right? That could be a thing, but I wouldn't recommend it. Christians should never despair. So I put three things here: repentance, humility, and love. These will never fail you. Repentance, humility, and love. I think I might, if I believed in tattoos, which is funny, I was in the Navy all those years, I never got a tattoo. If I had any tattoos, I would like that on my arm. Repentance, humility, and love. Always remember that as an idea. Don't go out and get a tattoo. But anyway, that was a terrible advice from Father Does Death. But I'm just saying, if I did have one, this would be something I'd want to constantly be reminded of. So Christians should look out on the world that surrounds them and daily grieve at what humans do to it and each other. We should take the blinders off and recognize that just a lot of destruction people are doing to themselves and others. I mean, people can be in nice cars, they can be in nice houses, they could be on the outside, as Jesus says, whitewashed sepulchres, right? On the outside, they look great. On the inside, they're dead inside, right? That's all sorts of people like that. You poke them just a little bit to see how they're doing, and they just break all over the place. So be mindful of that. And remember that there is never any triumphalism or pride when we defend the Word of God. There's only the profound humility of accepting our complete and utter dependence on God. I mean, everything I'm going to say tonight is nothing I invented, which is hard because we all kind of want to be innovators and be inventors and bring new things into the world, right? One of the great things about being a Christian is that you spend your life. One of the hard things about being a Christian is you spend your life saying, "Hey, the greatest moment in human history happened 2,000 years ago." Now there's a great moment coming too, but it may not happen in your lifetime. And then people are like, "What? No, I don't like that. I want to drive a flying car and be awesome." Like, yeah, I mean that could happen too, but that's not going to be the greatest thing that ever happens to you. That's a hard thing for people to hear, and sometimes Christians have to do that. So as I say, our dependence is on God. God is great, and we are great through Him always. So the suicide of young men and women should grieve Christians the most, since we know the supreme value God places on all human life. Yeah, so when someone confronts us with something like this and says, your beliefs kill people, we shouldn't just laugh that off as being ridiculous. I mean, it's not fair at all, by any stretch of imagination. But this is a person who's angry and confused and scared and is lashing out at you for whatever reason, right? Because they see you as a threat. Because the things you believe as a Christian change everything about their life. And they don't want to believe those things at a desperate cost. I mean, we fight it ourselves, I'm sure. But the pure fact that we're the only people that believe in that every single person has the image of God, a worth that goes beyond how the world values things, should make us feel every time someone dies. There's a great John Donne poem, for whom the famous line is, "Ask not for whom the bell tolls for thee." And the idea is of church bells ringing for funerals. And the idea is whoever died, there's a sense in which the world has lost something of itself in that person. The whole poem's called "No Man Is Mine." It's a beautiful, beautiful meditation on that idea, that the world has lost something whenever there's a suicide. Thomas Aquinas, who is awesome. If you haven't ever read Thomas Aquinas, you should read Thomas Aquinas. So I'm going to throw that out there. But Thomas Aquinas has this haunting image of suicide as being the man who kills another man kills one man. The man who kills himself kills all men. It's a silencing of everything. Haunting image. It just sticks with you. Come on in. Good evening. Hello. Come on in. It's that. I'll say it again because it's kind of one of those things. Please come in. So when he talks about suicide, oh well, what a cheery subject for you to walk in on. Indeed, just no worries. We were just of course talking about suicide. Why wouldn't one? But anyway, so when Thomas Aquinas, 13th century Dominican, invented basically the way Western people think for all intents and purposes. When he talked about suicide, he said it was a matter of, as I say, in murder we kill another person, in suicide we try to kill the whole world. The idea being that by shutting out the light, we can shut out everything. Of course, it doesn't actually work. I mean, that's the problem, right? But we should always treat all suicides with the dignity and respect that they deserve. It's a terrible thing. There's an author I very much respect on this subject who said that it's sort of like a person who jumps out of a burning building, right? Like we can't imagine, like, oh my goodness, that person jumping out of a building, but they're facing something that's so horrible it causes them to jump out of the building, right? And so I think that's also something we should take in consideration when we think about that as well. That when a person kills themselves, as Christians, we should feel it more than really anybody else even. Like that should be something that pains us. Because it's okay to be pained. The armor that people put around themselves is false. It's not real. It's okay to be hurt by things. We would say it's okay to be hurt by things because, all pain is a temporary thing. Particularly anyone who believes in a resurrection understands that. And we can take it. And we can take it for the world. But that's something for us to consider as we think about that. So when a Christian's thinking about these ideas, these concepts of sexual ethics, it's important for us to remember that, and this is really true of all debates, which I hate debates most of the time with people because it sort of becomes one of two things. Don't get me wrong, I love talking to people and them yelling at me, it's fine, it's all good times. And if anybody wants to yell at me tonight, that's also fine. I much prefer someone yelling at me than falling asleep, because then at least I know we hit something, we're talking somewhat. But in a real Christian loving conversation, it should always be about actually meeting that person in their suffering and holding them in that as hard as you possibly can. As opposed to it being, I'm here to convert you, or I'm here to beat you up, or I'm here to win, right? Nobody cares. Nobody cares if you won an argument one time. No one cares. ever, right? I can't tell you how many discussions I've been with people, and it feels like, it's high school debate club, and people are trying to score points, and who cares? No one's going to care about that anytime. But you suffering with that person and loving that person and getting so close to them they can't get away, right? Because you're just there with them. That could have eternal consequences. That actually matters, as opposed to winning or bludgeoning someone to make ourselves feel better. So there are lots of people who would hold to what we would maybe generally call a Christian sexual ethic who don't think this way. They, for whatever reasons, they're insecure in their own beliefs. They're insecure in all sorts of things. They're stupid, they're evil, they're mean, whatever. I'm here to judge. A little joke, because people always say I'm not here to judge. Anyway, I'm here to judge. Yeah, they're bad, right? And so they go in and they just start talking crazy town. That's not a loving approach to this issue. It's okay to have someone just vent at you. That's all right. You may be the only expression of Christ's love they ever get in their life. No pressure. So that's maybe is a big deal. Bigger deal than winning, whatever that actually means. So another thing to remember is that ick is not an ethic. I love this. I had an ethicist friend of mine who taught me this, that ick is not an ethic. If you think something is icky, that does not mean that it's wrong. For instance, eye surgery is super icky. You ever watched eye surgery? It's horrifying. Totally icky. Awesome though, right? Because people can then seeing things. So if your moral system is based on you finding either a thing or a person icky, that's a terrible moral system, right? Now, again, you may sometimes get this right. Like, I think dog poop is icky, so I don't eat it. Boom, nailed it. That's absolutely right. What do we have? But that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to be a good thing. As a matter of fact, and it's a terrible thing to do with people, right? Because people are more complicated than dog poop, right? One would hope we think that. So always remember, ick is not an ethic. This is one reason that, for instance, you saw opinions change so rapidly over the course of the zeros, right? Over questions like, say, for instance, like homosexual marriage, like gay marriage. Even the President of the United States changed his mind on this in a big way, right? And one of the things that consistently changed people's minds was they didn't have some kind of great epiphany or moral change in their souls, because most people don't have those generally, right? But the practice became normalized and it became less icky. And so people were like, well, it's not really icky, so it must be okay. This happens all the time with all sorts of strange things. If something becomes normalized, people are like, it can't be that bad, can it? We're like this. I don't know why humans are like this, but there's all sorts of things. I mean, even the cuisine in your life, right? There are things that people eat that you would probably never eat, right? But if you grew up eating them, you'd be, whatever. Like bugs, for instance. Lots of cultures eat lots of bugs. Like, if you've ever been in the streets, if you eat all sorts of places sell bugs in the street that you can eat, right? But if you did that in America, people would call it. If you did that in Clay County, you'd go to jail. The sheriff would you're gone, right? Yeah, that's interesting, right? That's an interesting thing about us. It's how we kind of operate, which is not helpful, right? For thinking deep thoughts about transcendent, eternal things. Ooh, that's gross. It's not helpful to our discussion at all. Right. Okay. So we talked about that. Let's talk about again. Now I love this part because this is stuff I don't have to Again, my whole job here is just to pass things down to people. This is great. My whole job is not to innovate, not to create new things. This is hard, right? But I do like this part of it. So, what is God's definition of love? Right? What has been passed down to me over thousands of years as to what God thinks love is. The weird thing is when people talk about this, the thing they never actually mention is like the enormous book that is sitting over here. They just start throwing crazy stuff out there. Or maybe God thinks love is the way I feel about my goldfish. Or maybe God thinks love is like the way I felt when I first kissed my boyfriend. Or all those things. People are like, maybe that's what love is. Well, I think it's probably a better idea for us to consider what he says about it through the incarnation. One of the great questions that Christians get wrong all the time is, like, why do we need Jesus Christ? Like, why is this a necessary thing in the world? Like, why? Why is the incarnation a necessary thing? Well, for one thing, God is an enormous concept, right? I mean, if you're a theist, I'm not even saying you're a Christian, but if you're a theist, right, you've accepted that there is a superhuman, supernal intelligence that has fine-tuned the cosmology of the universe to create life. You're there. So now you're like, but I could totally talk to that thing, right? And just totally get everything, right? We'd just be 100%. No, you wouldn't. This would not work out well, right? You ever talk to someone really smart and just sort of feel like a complete idiot when you're done with it, this conversation? That happens, right? But now imagine that times a billion. This conversation would not go well. There's a fancy theological term for this. It's called the incomprehensibility of God. Any God big enough to create the universe would be so big you could never get to bottom of who he is, right? You would never totally figure him out, right? I would, of course, argue, we don't have time for this at all, vociferously, though, that theism is the only thing that makes sense in the universe. But I don't want to beg that question. So if we're engaged in that, God has to communicate with us with a creature that's like us, that's on the same level as us. And that's what the Jesus Christ event is about. It's about God speaking to the creation he's made, his creatures, in a way that we can actually process. This is what John's whole point of this. If you've ever read John's prologue about who Jesus is, he's trying to get this to us. That the primary thing about the Jesus event is God revealing who he is to his creation in a way where they can actually understand it. The hilarious irony of this, of course, which is all part of John's gospel, is that the apostles constantly don't get what Jesus is saying, right? Jesus is speaking to them in plain language, and they're like, I have no idea what you're talking about all the time, right? I mean, that's one of the horrible ironies. And then at the end of it, a whole group of people get together and kill him, right? God has come down to show his love. I mean, that's fundamentally what Jesus Christ is doing. He's come to earth to reveal what God's love means, and then we kill him. Like, this is a totally human thing to do, right? This is how humans operate. Oh, thanks for coming down, God. We're now going to nail you to a tree. Thanks for stopping by. So that's, if you wanted to sort of the microcosm of the human experience of what we would do to ourselves and others, given the opportunity, this is it. And it's no accident that we have crosses and crucifixes in Christian churches. There are lots of reasons for it, but one reason is to remind us that when the embodiment of love came to earth, we killed him. Right? That you got to start there to kind of, and then if you start there, though, a lot of the human story makes a lot of sense, right? Like, how does war happen? Oh, got it, 100%. I get that now. We killed love that one time. I get why we could just kind of kill each other over and over and over and over again, and invent new and crazier and more powerful ways to kill each other. How could you destroy entire cities? Got it. That's how you could do it. It explains so much about what it means to be a human being. And that's something that you really get in the Passion narratives. That's one reason they're so long, is it's trying to show all the different shades of humanity in there. Both of them, the cowardice of the apostles and the barbarity of the Sanhedrin, and in the kind of the sort of banalness of the Romans, who are kind of like, geez, dude, we don't really want to kill this guy, but he's kind of causing a ruckus, so let's get this thing over with, right? And the banality of that is just really horrifying, but it's the way evil works in real life. Like, for instance, there was an accountant at Auschwitz, right? There's a guy who went in every day to the concentration camp where they were burning, killing Jews at mass graves, who came in every day with his satchel and sort of looked over the books, smelled people burning, and went home every day. There was a guy who did that. How did he do that? Right? Like I'm there with the evil of putting people down. But the guy who's just kind of like, I'm good. I'm just filling stuff out. I'm just doing my part, right? That's the banality of evil. That people can do that, can live on, right? There's all sorts of examples of this, right? Anyway, so God shows His love in Christ, and so Jesus says a bunch of stuff about love. St. John will go so far as to call God is love. And, that makes sense for someone who had such an intimate relationship with Jesus. But what does Jesus say about love? He says, "Greater love has no one than this, that someone laid down his life for his friends." Boy, if we were going to explain love to somebody, would that be where we started? It's a really interesting question. If we were going to say what is love, we start off with, well, the greatest love you can have is to die for someone. Most people would not start there at all. I've never heard a Christian start there. Have you? Probably not very many, right? Start there. That's where Jesus says, this is the greatest love you can possibly have. People who are following Christ almost never go there, right? That's fascinating. What else? This is the verse everybody thinks they know and love, but really, do we really think about this? John 3:16. "For God so loved the world that He gave His only Son, that whoever believes in Him should not perish but have eternal life." So again, if we think about why Jesus is coming, John 3:16 is explaining this in kind of a footnote kind of way. So God, to show what love looked like, sends His Son to love us. And He ultimately loves us, and this is a bigger theological idea, but He ultimately loves us by letting us kill Him. And this is the greatest love that a person can show for another. So what the fundamental idea that Jesus has revealed about the world, and about what God, who, as John describes, is love, right? What He thinks love is before we get anywhere else, we have to think of love as being sacrificial. It's one reason too. You ever read the Old Testament and why are they killing all these animals all the time in weird ways? And look, why is the book of Leviticus just all about all the specific ways in which you need to kill animals in very strange and horrible ways? Well, what it's trying to beat into our dense human minds is the idea that real love actually costs something horrible. To the world, anyway. Real love costs us something. I could say, for instance, English is terrible at this because we only have one word for love, right? I love, my favorite example is, I love my wife. I love cheeseburgers. Right? That word doesn't mean anything then. It's a useless word. People use it all the time for all sorts of things. Any word that has that broad a range of meaning is a word that doesn't really mean anything. Right? So that's why in Greek, for instance, you have 4 words that mean love. So Greek is the language that the New Testament is written in. And so eros is erotic love. Philia is a love between Philadelphia, brotherly love, the city brotherly love, that idea. So kind of a love between brothers. Christianity has to invent a word, basically, to describe this new love. You'll hear it said various ways. This is a transliteration. This is not Greek, but agape is how it works out. And so this was a barely used word in Greek that the Christians take to try to describe this idea of sacrificial love as being the love that's shown by Christ and the love that actually matters. So again, if I say, I love my wife, right, I could say that all day long. But what in my actions, what in my state of being actually reveals that to anyone? All sorts of things. Say, for instance, I never talk to my wife. Say that was the case. Would you say I love my wife very much? But what if I told you I loved her? I love her. But why didn't you talk to her? That's horrifying. Don't you care about her? Don't you want to know anything about her? Nah, I'm good. She's got her life, I've got my life. We would immediately say this person does not have much love, right? No matter what they said. I could write a one-man show about how much I love my wife. If I never talked to her, you would take that as the evidence, not the play I wrote. about how much I love my wife, right? Yeah, and that's a fascinating thing. And so we instinctively get this idea, but we kind of play games with language all the time about this. That the only real love that matters is a love that costs us something. This is a truth Christianity has just been beaten all day. So when this rolls out into the Roman world, again, a world that quantified love as power over others, a world I told you we're getting back to. It's dominance over someone else. Like we said, when someone says, who has the power in the relationship? That is an inherently un-Christian idea. That is an old idea that's come back to life. Right? The idea that the relationship between a man and a woman is a constant struggle to see who's going to be dominant. This made sense to Romans because they loved to fight battles. I mean, they conquered the whole world with a sword this long, right? The Gladius Hispano, which they stole from the Spanish, that they're still mad about it, right? Anyway, so they conquered the whole world with a sword this long. They liked conflict. So that made sense to them that love was just an expansion of conflict, right? And we've adopted that crazily and thrown away this idea that love is about sacrifice, constant sacrifice. So, once you get that idea, things start to make more sense about what in the world, for instance, the apostles are talking about when they mention things like marriage. So if Christian love is fundamentally about sacrificing ourselves for others, we see this beautifully in the two forms of love that are specified in Christianity. The first, of course, being marriage, right? And we begin to see also why it's indissoluble except by death, because there's a sense of two people sort of dying together and rising as one. It's a fascinating idea. We talk about that. And the other version, of course, being the other side of that being one that's not talked about as much because we'll talk about why. The other one, of course, being celibacy. But let's talk about marriage for a second. What's that about? I mean, the biggest thing, if you take nothing else away from tonight at all, and you can beat me up on this, you can yell at me, marriage is not about power. Oh my gosh, if we could get that out of our culture, it would be a fantastic world. Marriage is not about power, it's about sacrifice. Because if Christian love, I mean, don't get me wrong, people can get married who aren't Christians, and that can be about power all day long. Go at it. Fight each other, yell, scream, that's fine. It's not fine, it's horrible, but that's not my purview. My purview, though, if you're going to say that a Christian marriage is a Christian marriage, then it has to be about mutual sacrifice, right? It has to be, or it's not. So, what's interesting about that is, like, why is that the case? Well, the fascinating thing Jesus reveals, I mean, Jesus, remember, is the one who reveals what love is. What he reveals is that marriage is a temporary thing. It ends at death. And he's asked about this, right? And he says that there is no marriage in the new world to come. And so marriage is this temporary, beautiful symbol, living, breathing, walking around symbol of something greater than ourselves, right? It's in fact, a really fascinating way, it is an image of the Trinity. The love that exists within the three persons of God, walking around, talking, breathing, acting. And so when you look at the Trinity, when we think of how the Trinity operates, how the love within it is one that is constantly one of this self-sacrificial love, sort of existing. I mean, one way to think about it is sort of like a fan going around in a circle, like they're loving each other at this rate that's so great you can't see who's doing more. That idea then falls on the Christian marriage. And so the idea here is of two people who are so constantly sacrificing for each other. An onlooker looking in can't tell who is the most powerful, because that's not the metric by which they think about their marriage, because that's a pagan idea that's worked its way back into our culture. It's about who between the two of us, who's sacrificing the most. This is really helpful to remember when we think about what Paul says about marriage. So this is one of like the most misinterpreted passages in like the entire world. I'm sure you've heard Paul is this terrible, awful meanie who says that wives should submit to their husbands, right? And then there's a certain kind of guy who goes, yeah, that sounds pretty great. That sounds pretty awesome. I'm all about that. And a certain type of woman who goes, heck no, I'll be burning my bra out front later. this is it. I'm burning this place down with the patriarchy, let's go to war, right? Interestingly, those people, as far apart as they think they are both engaged in a power struggle. They're two sides of the same coin. They hate each other. Oh yeah. But they're both engaged in who's going to get the most power. The chauvinist and a certain type of feminist, right? That's a problem for this. Because if you read that back into the first century, there were no feminists in the first century. Or chauvinists, the way we kind of think of it now. So you've read a new idea into a text that isn't there, which is problematic. That's a really bad way to read anything, much less a book that you're trying to actually understand rather than attack, right? So now that we've sort of had the context as the idea of this mutual sacrifice, what the heck is he talking about? Well, we'll have that part, wives submit their husband. What comes directly after it? He says that men are to act as Christ acted with his church. Oh, what did he do for his church? Spoiler alert, he died for his church, right? He constantly debases himself for his apostles. Think of the night of his betrayal. When these guys are all going to abandon him, he's washing their feet, right? He tells them, I've come to serve, not to be served. And then ultimately, as I say, he literally dies for them. So a husband who walks up to a Christian marriage and says, I want that, has said, I want that, is what they've said. And not like hypothetical. Like, well, if someone is at a bar and they shoot a gun, I gotta jump in front of the bullet. Right? That is true. You do have to do that. But that's not what this is about. This is about every day dying in yourself for that person. Taking your strength, taking everything you have, and putting it on the table and saying, I sacrifice this for you. That's a whole different idea. And if a husband is doing that, what is the only possible response the wife can have? Submission. To sacrifice herself in the same way. It's the only way this works. And it's this beautiful image for people to look at and go, why doesn't that guy, at one time it was all about power, all about strength. Why doesn't that big strong guy just tell that person just to do everything and just lord over her, or then maybe get another wife in the mix too, because he's powerful and strong and can do it, right? Why doesn't he just do that, right? This says this was a living, breathing example of a hope, of a different way of thinking about love entirely. And it only works if you believe in a world to come. What it was ultimately was a saying that I don't need to win everything. I don't need to dominate my wife, or the wife doesn't need to dominate her husband, because I know that we are a living symbol of a new world that's coming, in which this love between us will be natural and the grammar of the universe. Right? That's what that's about. You're a living, breathing symbol of this world that's coming. It's not about who has the power. Who cares? You know who has the power at your deathbed? If you ever, I don't know if any of you have ever been this, maybe you have. You've ever been at a deathbed where there's a husband or a wife, and one of them's dying. Right? Nobody in that situation is talking about who has the power in the relationship, right? This is all a temporary thing. We don't think it is, for some reason, so all the evidence that is, but if you think your relationship is eternal, it's not at all. So fighting over who's in charge of it is insane. It's a waste of your time, right? The only thing you have is a sacrificial love based on the actual love of God that you could emulate, that tells the whole world that there's a new world that's coming. And that's not something that and again, that only makes sense if Jesus Christ, of course, is risen from the grave. That the love we tried to kill is stronger than the world itself. Right? That love couldn't be killed by us. That's that story happening. So when Christ rises from the grave, it's the ultimate expression of love being stronger than all the evil of the world. And so when a couple are together, and even if they're on the train to the concentration camp, the love they've had together hasn't been a waste. And that love can't be killed by the world. Because the love they have is the love of God. A love that transcends death. That's such a bigger, more beautiful idea than, your chimpanzee with a smartphone. That's a horrible, small idea of what it means to be human. It's dehumanizing. Ultimately, what Christ has shown us in his love is how to be human. How a new and beautiful way to be human. And so the hard thing about believing in a traditional Christian ethic of sexuality is that it is a radical, crazy idea that I have to constantly talk about. That in different periods of time, people have loved or hated. People hate more and more now. That's okay. That's all right. But I can't get away from it because it's the only thing that makes sense of the world. It's the only thing that can actually show us how to live in a world gone crazy. In a world that would try to kill love, as it will unfortunately try to kill in all of us. Make us jaded and angry and lonely and sad. Jesus just says nuts to that, which is good. It's good news. The thing that we have to take away from this too is that your sexuality is not what makes you human. Right? This is a big idea right now. Like when people talk about their identity, one of the things they talk about is their sexual nature, right? Their proclivities, right? This is a longer discussion, which we don't have time for, and I can talk about this more if you'd like. But so all of our ideas about these sort of categories of sexuality are just kind of inventions, right? From various periods and kind of put together. But what I would hope you take out of this is that sexuality is not the sum of who you are. It is a means by which we can proclaim a world better than this one. Is an empowerment of that. Not the fake power that I try to cling to and hold to my own, which eventually I'm going to die and let go anyway. You can't hold on to power for forever. Every emperor, every president dies. Right? I mean, they couldn't hold on to it. You can't either. But at the end of that day, that love energizes us and makes us able to proclaim the truth wherever we go. So I hope that is we could talk about this all day, and I would love to talk about it more in a different venue too. I would trust to boil this down into an hour, which is hard. But I would love to have questions about this. Pushback. I'm scared, Sarge. I hate you. This is evil. I mean, because I say the argument against this whole idea of human sexuality, the way it's been yelled at me before, and I'm a pretty nice guy. I'm not yelling at anybody, but anyway, is that this idea makes people kill themselves. That's a heck of a thing to level against people, right? And so you have to be super sure about something if you can take someone saying to you that the thing you believe murders people, right? You have to be so sure of it, you're not only willing to die for it, basically, at that point, right? I hope I argue tonight is that the alternative to this view of human sexuality, one I didn't invent, and one that has been passed down to me. This view of human sexuality is one that solves so many of the horrible problems that face young people and older people, frankly, in the post-sexual revolution in America. There are going to be lots of ideas out there about how do we get through all this. The argument I would make is an actualized, real vision of this, worked out within individuals and communities, is the way this gets better. Turning into the skid and hoping we can sort of revolutionize ourselves out of this, or technologize ourselves out of this, or unfortunately, it's my calling to have to know about all the horrible things people do to themselves regarding sexuality. Things I would never even mention in our company right now. Things people have told me about themselves that they want help with. And it is a grim space out there, 100% there, with you. And so I sincerely believe that this is our best means of going through that space, right? But please, if you have any questions, like, I'm mad at you, this doesn't make sense. No one is going to judge you for asking a question this evening. At all. I love questions. Does this seem reasonable at all? I hate this. This is making my head hurt. I hate you. I'll take that even. What do you think? Please.
I was like, I need a second.
Oh, you need a second? Okay. I can give you even that too. I'll give you a second. That's perfectly fine. And there's nothing, as I say, I hope no one will judge anyone else for a question in here as well. I know that's really hard. There's sort of the two problems. One is people don't want to seem like they don't know something they're supposed to know, which is always really annoying. This is really bad with adults or people who sort of think that they're kind of adults, right? They don't want to ask a question for, geez, I should really know that. What's wrong with that person? They must be the worst Christian ever. Or they think they're going to hurt my feelings or make me mad. No, that's never ever going to happen. So, thoughts, questions, anything at all? Please go ahead. You just walked in here. That's okay. I'll take anything. Any questions at all? Concerns. A question I've always wanted to ask, but I've never had the opportunity to ask about this. Oh man, the Puritans did something bad to us. This is something that I think we have to be really careful of as Christians. Is we have to be open to talking about this stuff because nature abhors a vacuum. If we don't talk about it openly in church, in front of our peers and everyone else, then what will happen is other people who love to talk about this stuff will talk about it all the time, and without you even realizing it, the thing you will internalize is that, right? So please, if you have a question on this, don't be, because I feel like we're a little embarrassed to talk about this too, which don't get anything. I'll take. Please. That's fine. I don't think I have anything you can throw, or books, but I'm pretty limber.
So, going back earlier when you were saying how a husband never really tries to talk to his wife or gets to know her.
Sure.
He says he loves her a lot. How does that contradiction kind of work? For someone to say that they love someone and they actually truly think that, but they're not actually trying to contact them or.
Great question. We are super good at lying to ourselves. There is no one we are better at lying to than ourselves. So a person will say, I love my wife, but I don't need to spend time with her. So I can play 18 holes every weekend and never see her, right? She knows I love her. Come on. I provide for her, I buy her things. She knows. She doesn't know, right? She wants more than that oftentimes. And vice versa too. This can go either way, where a woman will just treat her husband like garbage, like just the worst. I've seen this too. This is horrifying. We're just putting them down all the time and saying they're weak and useless. It's horrifying, right? Now she would say all day long, I love my husband. But there's no evidence whatsoever of it in their lives at all. And so it happens
it happens much more often than real healthy marriages, which is, as I say, not good. Unfortunately. But yeah, that's the way it happens, is because we create a fictional world where we're the hero of it, and so we don't do bad things in that fictional hero world where we're not the hero of the story. Good question, thank you. Others? That was an example of a good question.
Is there any explanation of the reason why there is the roads in that we carry forward?
Oh, great question.
That's like,
Well, because what's one of the primary purposes of marriage, right? It's procreation. And so God, the Creator, in a fascinating way, deputizes human beings to create eternal, immortal people. Right? That's a fascinating thing. There's lots of ways God could create life, right? All sorts of ways. The way he does it, though, is this particular fascinating way, as I say, of deputizing parents. One of the things the Bible's really clear on is that your children are not like yours. Like, they're not a possession, right? They're under your protection. You're a steward of them. The same way we're a steward of the earth, right? The earth isn't ours, right? We're stewards of it. There's a God that we take care of it for. So the idea being, so that since procreation is no longer a necessary feature of the new heaven and the new earth, right? The new heaven and the new earth, all the people who are ever supposed to be will be there, right? And so the function of marriage in that way is no longer necessary. Now, what's interesting about that is that means that the love between people will be of such, lots of people have thought about this question, right? And one way of thinking about it is that we'll be all so interconnected that it'll sort of be like, the love that we have for each other will be the same love one feels at your best for your wife or husband. So that the baseline emotional state of the new heaven and the new earth is like that. And so even at that point, so like that love is just constant and everywhere, right? And the interesting thing is you'll know the difference, right, between now and then. So we'll have that idea, but in that perfect world, one could go too far in this, but the love, is the love the Trinity shares, that perfect love they share becomes ours, right? We share in that love. And so, of course, we'll still be with God willing, the people we were with on earth, but marriage is a temporary thing that reveals an eternal truth. That's its job. History begins with a marriage of Adam and Eve. History ends with marriage of Christ and His church. And every marriage, every Christian marriage, is a signpost in a time that this is where we're coming from and where we're heading. So when we get there, we won't need the signposts anymore, which is good news. Other questions? Someone has to have a question more about this. That was another good question. Totally cool to ask a weird question. I love weird questions. I'll give you another little bit of time. I'm fine.
come on, girls, where are your questions? This is the perfect time.
It really is. This is going to get more awkward. Go ahead, Margaret.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm trying to think how to bring this. Okay. So, if someone rejects the example of Christ, but they still say that they love someone, and it is like sacrificial, can they really love them in its fullest sense?
Well, the problem with fullest sense, right? I think the good news about the world we live in is it could always be worse. There's a sense in which, as bad as things get sometimes, there's always the restraining hand of God on making it super, super bad. So there are all sorts of loves one will run into in your life that we would say perhaps are maybe disordered or that have sort of moments of what we maybe would call a transcendent love, right? That have all sorts of issues and problems within them, right? Probably spectrum of this. The problem with denying Christ in this vision of sacrificial love is that you lose the idea of there being a world greater than this one that's coming. That you are sort of, as Paul says it, living out your resurrected life right now. Well, if there's no resurrection, then at the end of the day, I'm going to pick me and my enjoyment of this world, because this is it. This is all I got, right? So when push comes to shove, I'm going to probably shove, right? Now, and don't get me wrong, I think that people can rise above that sometimes, but marriage is hard. That day in, day out struggle of that. But so is celibacy. I didn't talk too much. Celibacy is an incredibly important part of this picture as well, because celibacy, Jesus is celibate, for instance. Jesus is a fully human man. Jesus is it's a horrible thing to think that sexuality is all who you are. Was Jesus subhuman because he never had a wife? No, of course not. He chose a life, as he talks about, and so does Paul, of service to the kingdom of God, to live, again, as an example of a new world that's coming. So he could forego that, the joy of a marriage and child, because the new world is coming, which he's going to be a part of, right? So he gives himself up for that. Also, imagine how horrible it would have been if he died and his it was horrible enough his mother was there. Imagine a wife being there. Imagine that he has to go back to heaven to intercede for us for all time. How horrible it would be to leave her there. So in order to serve the kingdom of God, as this particular way that he had to serve, he's celibate. But all people are called to some form of celibacy. But again, a person remaining celibate during various stages of their lives is again, showing forth that there's a greater world coming, that they don't have to have that right now. All the love, there's a more love out there than the love they might possibly have in this moment, in this sort of disordered relationship, right? That there's a greater human love coming, right, at some point, mystical and transcendent, but also greater love to come in the world. That's a powerful witness. And that can be a witness even within relationships. That can be a witness, this is a hard thing in relationships between men and women in our age of over-sexualization. It's everything, it's everywhere. People think differently about this than they did in the past, because we're just constantly bathed in these ideas. And it's also, companies know what they're doing. They sexualize this because sexualized people buy lots of things. It's the same reason we get politicized, because that way politicians can control us. There's all sorts of things connected into all of this, that we're sort of being manipulated in ways that we just don't really necessarily notice all the time. Anybody who says they're not manipulating is manipulating, right? All the time. And these people are in a big way. But so I think that's a really careful thing we have to be with this whole idea when we're thinking of what it means to be a immortal human being in a fallen, decaying world, right? That there's just so much more than, that every action you do, particularly, and this is just one space in it, right? Your person's sexual life. That every action we do says something about what we actually believe. And that we don't get those opportunities all the time. And when those opportunities come up, when we can literally die to ourselves for Christ, and there's no doubt about it. There's no doubt that a person putting their faith in the world to come over the intense desire two people might feel for each other in a situation, that is a death, that can hurt, right? But when Christ says stuff like, you got to take up your cross and follow me, people are like, yeah, that's like a metaphor, right? I'm not carry a cross, right? Yeah, that's what he's talking about. That in order for us to imitate Christ in this world, in order to show what we actually believe, that there are times when we're really going to have to be hurt in that way, and that it's going to feel like suffering to die. What do we think die to ourselves means when St. Paul says it all the time, and St. Peter says it, What do we think that actually means? That not pleasant, or it won't be pleasant, but it's in service to something so much greater. And we understand this about all sorts of other things in our life. Like anybody who goes to boot camp to go join the military knows it's going to be terrible, but there's in service to some greater thing, right? Like I went to Navy boot camp, and I got to tell you, there are parts of it that I would never recommend for anyone else. But I knew at the end of it, there was something I was working towards that mattered, right? So I was willing to go through all the terrible things. And it was a living symbol of that. I mean, I even wore a uniform, right, that said I symbolize something. Well, every single Christian symbolizes their God. So when they do things, they put themselves through those things, it matters. It really does. It shows what they believe. It shows themselves what they believe. We need that all the time, right? And the good news is, I mean, and also, of course, I recognize, the church is very much doing triage at this point, right? I mean, a whole generation has just been run over by the sexual revolution, and there's sort of a where so many people are like, well, maybe we can just sort of co-opt all these things and we'll all be okay. It hasn't been okay, right? It'd be one thing if you and I were sitting in a church in 1955 and we're like, man, this whole sexual revolution thing, it's exciting. Let's see what happens. We're now 40 years into it, and it's a mess and a disaster for individual human beings. And obviously within that there are some good things that came out of it. But the vast majority of human beings has been a complete and horrible disaster. For me to continue to say, well, maybe it'll all work out, would be evil and terrible, and a disservice to you. So I can't do that. But I think the good news is that even within these relationships, you get a taste of some of that love. There's a common grace that exists within different people. And so it's a way of making, like, that. Those are good things. Because they do make the world less terrible. So, like, Hitler loved his dogs. Do you know that? Loved his dogs, right? So Hitler, maybe he spends 10 minutes playing ball with his dog and doesn't spend 10 minutes thinking about how he can gas people. That's a great thing. I'm glad Hitler loved his dogs. Now, I wouldn't say this redeems Hitler because he loved dogs, right? I would go, still terrible, right? But I can certainly say that the affection he had for his dogs was a good thing, right? All day long. And it's a symbol, too, of something good. Of course, he gave his dog cyanide, but at the end. But anyway, that's kind of his Hitler, right? I mean, he's a bad guy. But he did love his dogs before. I mean, he gave his wife cyanide, too, so, I mean, not a good example of a loving relationship. Hey, sweetheart, the Russians are coming. I guess we have to kill ourselves. Well, maybe you need to kill yourselves. I think I'm going to be okay. No, we have to be together. So here you go. Great. But anyway, I think that's what you have to focus on, right? That there are good things about that. That doesn't mean that we get to sort of redefine the universe in order to say that we're in charge, which we're just not. Like if you were sort of a title of the sexual confusion of our age, it would be, we're really bad at being in charge of this. But there's some to consider on that, right? There's even the layers of that we can celebrate, right? Of non-Christian marriages, love in them. There's things we can celebrate in that as well. But it's not the same thing as us talking about the reality that maybe is pointing us towards. Good question. Tough question. Good one though. Please.
In sacrificial love, if the sacrifices you make the other person suffer, would that still count as love?
So the sacrifices you're making make the other person suffer?
Or bring the other person suffering?
Well, that is a bad sacrifice, right? Like the sacrifice matters. I mean, hopefully again, back to the whole Old Testament thing, like why are all these things about what the sacrifice is supposed to be? The sacrifice really matters, right? So, I try to think of an example of how hypothetically this would work. I can't think of one off the top of my head, but that would be better. Like, if you're suffering, there's a bad term. People talk like, oh, don't be a martyr. Like, where like someone suffers in order to make the other person feel bad. Like they like doing it just to hurt the other person. That is a thing, it's true, but they're not doing it for the right reason, right? The same way if you like brought a sacrifice in the Old Testament temple and said, I want to sacrifice this and maybe my brother's goat will die. Like you're not doing it for the right reason, right? So it's not listen. But yeah, no, so that would be an example of trying to hurt someone through suffering, which is not the idea here at all. Same way as you're not supposed to, you know, when in Christian thought, when we talk about how suffering is oftentimes when we're closest to God, because God chose to save us through suffering, it doesn't mean like go get a hair shirt or like beat yourself or throw yourself down the stairs to feel more like Jesus, because you're doing damage to as Paul says, the temple of God He's given you, right? What do you think?
I was going to ask Angela to give an example of like.
Oh.
Oh, do you have an example? Oh, gee, I should have asked that.
What I
Great,
mean
good
is,
job.
like, you know how some people say like they'll let someone go because they love them?
If you love it, set it free.
Yeah.
It's a Sting song.
But then if it hurts like the other person, is it still love?
If you love something, set it free. Like most little cute phrases like that are almost always pretty stupid. Like any sort of philosophy you can sort of like boil down to like 5 words, 6 words is pretty dumb. Or at least is not super useful for life. There are all sorts of people who believe these stupid cliches and just live their lives on them. Like, no, that's horrible. Why do you do that? Well, it's a cliche though. Everyone says it. Stop doing that. That's horrifying. Like, don't do that. Like, yeah, so if you love something, set it free. I mean, I suppose there's some limited application in that. Like, say for instance, you had a pet turtle that like needed to live out in the wild, and I gotta keep my turtle, but it's gonna die unless I release it. If you love it, set it free. But like, if we're talking about like human beings, I don't even know, like, what does that even, I mean, I suppose if it, I struggle to think of a situation. I mean, some of the reason people get so hurt in relationships is because they advance them to a stage of physicality that we're not really built for, and then it all falls apart because they really weren't meant to be together for various reasons, right? And then it just kind of, they're angry and hurt, and it just blows up, and then, as opposed to a non-physical relationship where it's like, boy, I'm sure glad we tried this out, but I don't think this is a thing. Goodbye, friend. It's a different kind of thing. So there's a lot of things wrong with the way we do relationships, and it's super new. Like this whole idea of like hookup culture or coupling or all those ideas. These are really, really sort of like, I mean, they're really old ideas, don't get me wrong. I mean, these are things that have been around forever. But sort of, it's kind of a reason why these things were heavily regulated. I mean, one of the big reasons that brought about like the whole dating culture, fascinating enough, is technology. So the car, right? If there are no cars, we probably wouldn't have dating culture, right? Because the idea that you could like drive up to somebody's house and like go someplace. I mean, if you lived in a village like 100 years ago, no cars, right? So everyone knew where you couldn't get away with your date to go do whatever, right? So because you were all around each other. It's like everyone knew each other, and you couldn't live far away from your job either. So everyone knew everything about everyone, right? And so there's sort of a chastity police force of everyone, kind of like watching, taking care of everyone, courtship and all that. Like we can laugh at that. Oh, that's all so stupid, right? I don't think it's that stupid. And I particularly don't, like, anyone who thinks that the current setup we have is working super great and has no problems whatsoever is I think kidding themselves. Now the answer may not be like get rid of cars. I don't think that's the answer. But we need to think seriously about what are the advantages and disadvantages of like telling people whose brains are still developing, because like your brain keeps developing to you like 25. Hey, we would like never let you vote or like now I guess own a gun, but we're gonna let you experiment with human sexuality and hope it all works out. Like that's crazy. Like that's nuts that we do that, but we're totally into it, right? And where did that come from? That came from, that's like a 40-year-old idea. Like just sort of, like, and it's not even that old. Like it just suddenly appeared, and people were like, yeah, let's do that. Let's see what happens. And it's not working out super well. Like so, there's lots of ways in which this is just nuts. And people just buy it because everyone else is doing it, and because it's easier to. It's also easier. That's a big thing too. But yeah, like experiments in human sexuality when you're 12. I mean, you look at these statistics. It's just something. But yeah, like we never say, "Hey kid, here's a car. Go drive around." Like, well, no, you gotta be like 50. You gotta like pass a test. You gotta do all sorts of stuff before you can do that, right? But like we're totally fine with everything else. What do you think? Thoughts?
What's the
Smartphone.
no?
Go. No, you're fine. You're
it's
fine.
a
Fine.
question.
No, please. No, I'm just kidding.
What's the Christian response to the saying that you have to learn to love yourself before you can learn other people?
Okay.
Does that really mean to put yourself before others, or does it have something more to do with like accepting our own flaws?
Okay. Two parts of that. I'll answer the first part. The second part first. We're really, really good at accepting our own flaws. Like no one is bad at that. Now, there are certain mental conditions that can like make you do strange things to yourself. But the idea that like we have like a self-esteem crisis in America is a little bit overblown. There's certainly people who feel bad about themselves. We certainly have a suicide epidemic, particularly on young girls, which is horrifying and terrible. But a lot of that has to do with loneliness and high expectations. And also all sorts of other issues involved. So a person who, like, telling someone they need to love themselves first. Okay, so say I were to tell you, in order for you to know more, in order for you to learn anything about Paris, France, you need to know yourself first. Now, you may learn about yourself, but are you ever going to know anything about Paris, France? No, you're not. The assumption, this is a classic idea that sort of like deep inside yourself is like all the truths of the world, and that if you could just focus deep enough, you could like find everything and like unlock the secret of all things, is a stupid idea and blatantly anti-Christian, right? I mean, Christ walks around telling people that like all the evil in the world comes from your heart. So if you look inside your heart, what are you going to find? Evil, right? And that's okay, because I'm here to save you from all that. And matter of fact, the Holy Spirit is going to penetrate you, and you're going to work with it to destroy the evil that's inside of you because you desperately need it. See, like the Holocaust. Like, we really need that evil to be destroyed in us. So to say that, this is a classic, Christianity really rubs up against this, but this is a much older idea. The British monk Pelagius had this idea that he said that inside of everybody was the divine spark, right? And so you could like blow on the divine spark, and you didn't need Jesus or any of the other stuff, but you could just blow on that, and if you could get it going, the fire going, you could be perfect and good. And Augustine, who St. Augustine is named after, came in like both barrels firing on this idea, and wrote one of his great treatises against Pelagius, whose name is Morgan Pelagius. He's a British monk now. But that's a constant idea in philosophy, a constant idea that if we could just somehow look into ourselves, we could find all truth. And I'm just going to tell you, we don't think that way about anything else. Like, we don't think that I can learn how to be a good driver by like staring into my soul and waiting for insight. Or I could be a good French chef by just sitting at my house and thinking about it deeply. I gotta love myself before I can become a French chef. Just basically put that before anything else, and it just sounds completely ridiculous. So I gotta love myself before I can love other people. That is ultimately too very, very problematic. Because the great thing about being a Christian is that it moves us from focusing on ourselves and our selfishness, on which we're really naturally very selfish. Ask a baby, right? Anyone who's ever lived with a baby knows that a baby is very, very cute, but very, very selfish. Wants what they want when they want it, and they will hurt you to get what they want, right? They will scream and yell and hurt you to get what they want, right? They have no command. They would kill you to get what they want if they could, right? They wouldn't think about it being murder, but if they get what they want, they would do that, right? That's our natural state. So all I gotta do is be a big baby, and then I'm gonna somehow become enlightened. No. 1,000 times no. That's not how anyone becomes enlightened, right? But I hear it all the time. But and that's also unfortunately how people like go back to like follow your heart nonsense. That's how people like make decisions, right? So like, okay, I certainly haven't been like indoctrinated by any of the information around me, by my parents, by television, by mass media, by academia. None of that's affected me. So when I make a decision, it's all me and none of that. Is it? Is it all you? None of that? Really? Is that possible? No. No, it's not possible. So the little voice in your heart is not like Jiminy Cricket. Let your conscience be your God. Jiminy Cricket's an idiot. Also, he's not inside you. He's outside of you, right? Like he's telling him what to do, right? Like he's not really his conscience. Anyway, so, very nice. But anyway, yeah, so this is a pet peeve of mine when people talk like this, because I hear it from people who are 5 years old to people who are 85 years old. In their decision-making tree, I do what feels right. It's the time we live in. But it's a really bad way to make decisions. Again, every horrible injustice in the entire world has ever been done was someone following their heart. Ever. So that can't be it. Right? I don't know. You don't want me following my heart. Bad stuff like that. Not good. Anyway, other thoughts? It's a good question. Yeah, it's everywhere. I'm 100%. It's my life. You just triggered me right there. That's my whole life. But I feel like I should be able to do this. I'm sure you do. That's great. I'm happy for you. Nobody cares. That's not how any of this works. Anyway, I'm sorry. Any other thoughts, questions, concerns? All right. So let's end on a high note, well, I suppose. I want to make sure that we functionally disconnect ourselves from prudism or puritanism or anything that says that sexuality is inherently evil or bad. This is an argument Christians argued against all the time. I mean, Paul's argued against this in the epistles, where like people decided like they wouldn't have sexual relations, and they sort of like because the world was going to end anyway, so who cares? And he's like, that's really stupid. Don't do that. Or there were the Shakers. You ever seen like a Shaker chair? So the Shakers, they were like sort of around this is a like 19th century Pietist movement. They were connected like the Quakers and those guys. Like you ever bought Quaker oats? Like this was like you don't know. But the Shakers, they make chairs and things. And if you've ever heard bum bum ba da 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 ba da da, that's the Shaker melody. Well, they thought that if they stopped procreating, they could force God to bring the end of the world. And what they forced was the end of the Shakers, because they're all gone because they stopped procreating, right? Like that's a really stupid idea, right? It's classic, right? Classic human. We're all over the place. So that's what I want to make sure that we recognize that there's a beauty and a wonder in the sacrificial love of Christianity, and just emblazoned on our hearts, I hope, by the example of Christ and His Holy Spirit in our lives. And we do work with that constantly, and when we do, it becomes a beautiful, wonderful thing and a showpiece of the world to come to all people. So that we have to hold on to, even as people yell and scream and freak out, and we fail sometimes and do bad things that we wish we hadn't done. Pick ourselves up and get back to the work of being something more than our dog or chimpanzee or parrot, whatever. Right? That there's more to being human than that. All right. Thank you, everyone. I appreciate that. If you'd like to take more goldfish, I know goldfish. These aren't silverfish. These are goldfish. Feel free to grab some on your way out. It's a horrifying silverfish. Anyway, what's that?
Platinum fish.
Platinum fish, and those are the expensive ones, right? That's if I really, really liked you. As I said, we get the platinum fishing. Oh boy. Anyway, but as I say, if you have any other questions during the weeks, you can go on our website and find my email address, or call me, or send me a Facebook message or anything along those lines. Don't worry about it. I'm not going to tell anyone or anything like that. Unless you say like, hey, I think I'm going to like kill someone or kill myself, then I'm going to tell somebody. But other than that, I'm fair and open to that. to any thoughts or concerns that you might have about this. And I'm here to be a resource for you in a world that sometimes just doesn't care. I care a lot, so please contact me at all if you need anything. All right. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.